You know, there's something rather uncomfortable I need to tell you. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone with half your intelligence is getting the job you wanted. Someone with half your talent is standing on the stage you dreamed of. Someone who knows far less than you is being listened to by the very people who ignore you. And here's what should disturb you deeply. It's not because they worked harder. It's not because they deserved it more. It's because they walked into the room as if they already belonged there. And you walked in asking permission to exist. This is the secret nobody wants to admit. The world doesn't reward the most capable. It rewards the most certain. And certainty, my friends, is not something you're born with. It's something that was stolen from you, systematically, deliberately, before you even knew you had it. Today, I want to show you how to take it back. But I must warn you of something first. What I'm about to describe isn't comfortable. It isn't nice. And it will require you to kill a version of yourself that you've been protecting your entire life. A version that, if you're honest, has been slowly suffocating you from the inside. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you said exactly what you meant? Not the softened version. Not the version with 17 qualifiers and escape routes built in. When did you last speak a sentence without immediately scanning the room to see if anyone disapproved? If you have to think about it, you've already answered my question. You see, there's a character living inside most of us. I call it the servant. And the servant has been running your life for so long that you've forgotten it isn't actually you. The servant is the voice that tells you to apologize before you've done anything wrong. It's the part of you that rehearses conversations 3 times before having them, editing out anything that might cause friction. It's the impulse that makes you shrink your body in meetings, laugh at jokes that aren't funny, nod at ideas you disagree with. The servant's entire job is to make sure you never become a threat to anyone. Never too loud, never too certain, never too much. And here's the tragic irony. You were trained to believe this was virtue. Humility, politeness, being a good person. But what if I told you that this programming had nothing to do with making you good? What if it was designed from the very beginning to make you manageable? Think about your childhood for a moment. Really think about it. Every time you expressed certainty, what happened? Don't be arrogant. Every time you took space, what were you told? Don't be selfish. Every time you wanted something without apologizing for wanting it. Who do you think you are? These phrases weren't random. They were instructions, and you followed them perfectly. You learned to make yourself smaller, quieter, less threatening. You learned that the safest way to exist was to exist as little as possible. The servant was born from 1,000 tiny surrenders, and now it runs everything. But here's what nobody told you about confidence. It was never a personality trait. It was never something you either have or you don't. Confidence is a decision, a violent, deliberate decision to stop negotiating with your own existence. There's an old principle, you might call it Machiavellian, though it predates him by millennia, that power doesn't flow to the most qualified. Power flows to the most willing to take it, the most willing to act as if it already belongs to them. And this isn't about deception or arrogance. It's about something much simpler. It's about the recognition that nobody is coming to give you permission. Nobody is going to tap you on the shoulder and say, now you're ready. Now you may speak. Now you may take up space. That moment will never come. Because readiness is a myth the servant invented to keep you waiting forever. The people who have what you want didn't wait until they felt ready. They didn't wait until they had proof they deserved it. They simply decided one day that hesitation was a form of death, and they chose to live instead. Now, I'm going to share something with you that may sound strange at first. The fastest way to become confident is not to build it. It's to invert everything the servant tells you to do. When the servant says shrink, you expand. When the servant says explain yourself, you pause. When the servant says apologize, you simply look, you hold their gaze, and you wait. This is not arrogance. This is rebellion, a quiet, calculated rebellion against every instruction that was planted in you to keep you controllable. You see, there's something the servant desperately doesn't want you to discover. The feelings you're waiting for, that sense of being ready, of being confident, of being enough, they don't come before the action, they come after. You don't feel confident and then act boldly. You act boldly and then, sometimes minutes later, sometimes hours, the feeling catches up. The feeling follows the behavior, not the other way around. This is why waiting to feel ready is such a perfect trap. You're waiting for an emotion that can only be generated by doing the very thing you're too afraid to do. The servant knows this. That's why it keeps telling you to wait. Let me tell you about a man I once observed. Let's call him Thomas. Thomas was brilliant. Everyone who worked with him knew it. He could see solutions to problems before others even recognized the problems existed. His insights were regularly stolen by colleagues who would present them in meetings with exactly the confidence Thomas lacked. And Thomas would sit there, watching his own ideas earn applause for someone else, wondering what was wrong with him. Nothing was wrong with him. Everything was wrong with how he'd been taught to exist. Thomas had perfected the art of being nice, of being helpful, of being the person everyone could rely on but nobody quite respected. He was, in the language of power, a tool, a useful instrument that others picked up when needed and set down when they were finished. This isn't cruelty. This is simply how the world operates when you refuse to operate within it. When you make yourself endlessly available, you communicate that your time has no value. When you constantly seek approval, you communicate that your judgment cannot be trusted. When you soften every statement, you communicate that your ideas aren't worth defending. Thomas wasn't being overlooked despite his brilliance. He was being overlooked because of his availability, his niceness, his pathological need to be liked. The moment he stopped needing to be liked, everything changed. Not because he became cruel or cold, but because he finally understood that his job wasn't to make everyone comfortable. His job was to be useful, precise, valuable, and then to step back and let that value speak for itself. Now, I need to be careful here, because there's a version of what I'm describing that becomes its own prison. Some people hear stop being nice and become cruel. They hear don't seek approval and become incapable of connection. They hear project certainty and become insufferable. This is the servant's final trick. It takes the medicine and turns it into poison. It whispers, if softness made you weak, then hardness will make you strong. But hardness isn't strength. It's just softness with armor. What I'm pointing toward is something more subtle. Not the absence of warmth, but warmth that doesn't need to be repaid. Not the absence of kindness, but kindness that isn't a transaction. Not the absence of vulnerability, but vulnerability that isn't performed for approval. The goal isn't to become untouchable. The goal is to become unmanipulable. There's a profound difference. There's something almost alchemical about presence. You've felt it, haven't you? Someone walks into a room and the atmosphere shifts. Nothing is said. No announcement is made. But somehow, without a single word, everyone knows something has changed. This isn't charisma in the Hollywood sense. This isn't charm or attractiveness or social skill. This is something far more primal. It's the energy of someone who has stopped asking for permission to be there. When most people enter a room, they're scanning for safety. Where are the friendly faces? Who might reject me? How can I minimize the risk of being noticed in the wrong way? Their body language communicates negotiation, submission, a constant, unconscious apology for taking up space. But when someone with genuine presence enters, they're not scanning for approval. They're assessing terrain, not asking, will they accept me, but observing what is happening here. The difference is felt before it's understood. And this extends to every physical detail. How you move, how fast you move, where your eyes go, what your posture communicates. There's an old observation about predators in nature. They don't hurry. Watch a lion walking through the savannah. There's no rush, no anxiety. The speed communicates something essential. I am not subordinate to time. I am not reacting to circumstances. I move at my own pace because my pace is the one that matters. When you rush, you signal that someone else's schedule controls you. When you speak quickly, filling every silence, you signal that silence itself is threatening to you. When you shrink your body to take less space, you signal that you don't deserve the space you're in. None of this is conscious for most people. It's the servant, operating automatically, keeping you small without your knowledge. But once you see it, once you really see how your body has been betraying your power in 1,000 tiny ways, you can begin to reclaim it. Move deliberately. Speak when you choose to speak. not when silence becomes uncomfortable. Let your body occupy the space it naturally requires. And when you enter a room, enter it as if you have every right to be there, because you do. Now we come to something delicate, the question of voice. There's a particular pattern of speech that the servant loves. It's called upspeak, the habit of turning statements into questions by raising your pitch at the end. Listen to how the servant speaks through you. I think we should maybe try this approach. Sorry, this might be a stupid question, but I could be totally wrong here. But now listen to how certainty sounds. We're doing this. The answer is no. I disagree. Feel the difference? The first is negotiation. The second is declaration. And then there are the escape hatches, the phrases designed to give you somewhere to run if anyone challenges you. I could be wrong, but this might be a stupid question, but I'm not sure if this makes sense, but every single one of these phrases accomplishes the same thing. It tells the listener that you don't trust your own words. And if you don't trust them, why should anyone else? The voice of someone who has killed the servant sounds entirely different, lower, slower, with pauses that aren't filled with nervous chatter. When they finish a sentence, it doesn't rise into a question. It lands, like a stone dropped into still water. And then, silence, comfortable silence, because they're not waiting for permission to have spoken. This isn't about dominating conversations. It's about the opposite, actually. It's about saying less, but meaning what you say. It's about speaking as if your words are conclusions, not proposals. Information, not requests. When someone challenges you, you don't defend. You don't justify. You don't launch into a lengthy explanation of your reasoning, as if you're on trial. You simply say, I disagree, or that's incorrect, and then you wait. The silence after a declarative statement is unbearable for most people. They rush to fill it, to soften the tension, to apologize for having an opinion. But the person who can sit in that silence, who can let it expand without flinching, that person controls the room without appearing to try. Everything I've described so far, the posture, the movement, the voice, these can all be practiced, rehearsed, and eventually mastered. But there's a deeper layer that cannot be faked. Your emotional reactions, you can stand tall, you can speak slowly, you can hold eye contact. But if a single insult sends you spiraling, if a word of criticism ruins your entire day, if you lie awake at night replaying conversations and imagining better responses, then you're still a prisoner. The servant's deepest victory isn't controlling how you appear, it's controlling how you feel. It's making you hostage to what others think of you. And this is where true liberation begins. Consider this. If a compliment lifts you up, then you've given that person power over your emotional state. If an insult tears you down, you've given them even more. Every time your inner peace depends on external validation, you've outsourced your sovereignty to whoever happens to be speaking. This isn't freedom. This is a more sophisticated form of slavery. Real immunity, the kind that makes someone genuinely untouchable, comes from a single recognition. Your mind is private property. You decide what enters. You decide what affects you. Other people's opinions about you are just that. Their opinions. And you are not required to take delivery of them. When someone tests you, insults you, tries to provoke a reaction, the servant wants you to defend yourself, to explain, to prove them wrong, to win the argument. But there's a response far more powerful than winning. Not reacting at all. Let the provocation land. Observe it. Ask yourself quietly, what does this person want from me right now? What are they trying to achieve? And then deny them that achievement simply by remaining unmoved. The visible absence of reaction is more devastating than any comeback. It communicates something that cannot be argued with. You don't have the power to disturb me. There's one final territory we need to enter together. Rejection. The word itself probably triggers something in you. A memory, perhaps. A moment when you offered yourself, your work, your heart, and it was declined. And you felt, in that moment, like something essential about you had been weighed and found wanting. The servant feeds on these memories. It replays them endlessly, using them as evidence for why you should never put yourself forward again, why you should stay small, stay safe, stay hidden. But I want to suggest a different interpretation. Rejection is not a verdict on your worth. It's information about your positioning. When someone says no to you, they're not saying you are not valuable. They're saying, I cannot see your value from where I'm standing. Or perhaps you were too available, and availability destroyed your perceived worth. The problem isn't you. The problem is how you presented yourself. And here's what I want you to understand about responding to rejection, because this is where most people destroy themselves. The servant wants you to feel the rejection publicly, to show your disappointment, to try to change their mind, to ask why in a wounded voice, to make it obvious that they've hurt you. This is exactly wrong. When you are rejected, there is only one appropriate response. Nothing visible. No emotion on your face. No pleading in your voice. You accept the information and then you remove yourself completely. Not dramatically. Not angrily. You simply become unavailable. And something strange happens in that absence. People feel the vacuum. They notice what's missing. The space you used to occupy starts to have weight. And very often, they begin to wonder if they made a mistake. But here's the crucial part. By the time they wonder, it should no longer matter to you. Your absence is not a strategy to win them back. It's not a manipulation to make them regret. It's simply the natural consequence of recognizing that they didn't have the vision to appreciate what you offered. They disqualified themselves, and you've moved on to places where your value is obvious. The ultimate response to rejection isn't revenge. It isn't argument. It isn't proving them wrong. It's becoming so undeniably excellent that their rejection becomes irrelevant. Not for their sake, for yours. So here we are, at the end of something, and perhaps the beginning of something else. Everything I've described, the death of the servant, the inversion of your instincts, the reclaiming of your presence, voice, emotional sovereignty, and relationship to rejection, none of this is easy. None of it happens overnight, but it does happen, gradually. Through thousands of small rebellions against the programming you've carried your whole life. And you might be wondering, is this even who I want to become? Isn't there something cold about this? Something hard? Here's what I've learned watching people make this transformation. They don't become cold. They become clear. They don't become cruel. They become precise. They don't stop caring. They stop needing. And in that absence of need, something remarkable emerges. They become genuinely generous, because their generosity comes from abundance, not desperation. They become genuinely kind, because their kindness isn't a transaction for approval. They become genuinely present with others, because they're no longer scanning for threats. The servant told you that your smallness was keeping you safe, but it was actually keeping you isolated, trapped in endless calculations about what others might think. When you finally kill the servant, you don't become less human. You become more human than you've ever been allowed to be. I want to leave you with something to carry. You were not born hesitant. Watch any child before the world gets to them. They announce their desires without apology. They take up space without permission. They cry when they're hurt and laugh when they're happy without checking first to see if it's appropriate. That certainty you're looking for, you already had it. It was trained out of you, systematically, by people who were themselves trained, by a world that needs you manageable more than it needs you magnificent. But training can be undone. Programming can be rewritten. The servant can be killed, not through affirmations, not through positive thinking, but through action, through behaving again and again as the person you've been afraid to become, through walking into rooms as if you belong there, through speaking as if your words matter, through holding space as if your presence is a gift you're offering. This isn't self-help. This is reclamation. You are taking back what was always yours. And the world, the same world that taught you to be small, will reorganize itself around your new certainty. Not because you demanded it, but because certainty, real certainty, creates its own gravity. People don't follow those who ask for permission. They follow those who've stopped asking. The question now is simple. How much longer will you wait to become who you were before the world told you who to be?
Have you ever considered that you cannot have the experience of being alive without someday experiencing death? That these two apparent opposites aren't really opposites at all? but rather two aspects of the same extraordinary process? Most people spend their entire lives running from this simple truth, and in doing so, they miss the astonishing beauty of existence itself. You know, in the Western world, we've developed the most extraordinary attitude toward death. We put it away, hide it in hospitals, speak of it in hushed tones, and generally pretend it isn't going to happen to us. How perfectly absurd. It's rather like expecting a banker to give you credit without ever having to pay it back. This profound fear of death is, I submit to you, the root of our inability to fully live. We're so busy defending ourselves against the inevitable that we miss the dance entirely. Look at how we speak about it. We fight disease, we battle aging, as if life were some sort of war to be won. But what kind of victory would it be to live forever? Would you really want to watch the same movie for eternity? Consider the music you love. The beauty of a symphony isn't in holding one lovely note indefinitely. That would be quite boring, wouldn't it? The beauty is in the movement, the changing patterns, the rhythm of notes coming into being and passing away. Without the spaces between notes, without beginnings and endings, there would be no music at all, just noise. 0. 5. So it is with your life. The fact that it doesn't last forever is precisely what gives it its poignancy and meaning. Death isn't something that happens to life, it's something that life does. Just as we might say the ocean waves, we could say that the universe peoples. And people, like waves, rise up, assume a particular shape for a brief moment, and then merge back into the ocean from which they came. Is this really so frightening? Or is it, perhaps, the most natural thing in the world? Now, what if I were to suggest to you that life and death are playing an elaborate game of hide and seek with each other? Not as adversaries, but as intimate dance partners who cannot exist without one another. Isn't that a marvelous thought? You see, we've been taught to think of life and death as opposites, as if they were engaged in some sort of cosmic battle. But I want to propose something rather radical. They're actually conspiring together. They're in cahoots, and the joke is on us for not seeing it. Consider this peculiar fact about nature. Nothing is ever wasted. When a leaf falls from a tree, it doesn't disappear into oblivion. It decomposes, becomes soil, feeds the very tree from which it fell. The tree couldn't continue to live without the death of its leaves. Or think about food. Every time you eat, something must die, be it plant or animal, so that you may continue to live. And someday, your body will nourish other forms of life. What a magnificent system. We're all taking turns being lunch for each other. In the East, particularly in Hindu mythology, they understand this beautifully through the figure of Shiva, the creator and the destroyer, in one divine form. Not a god of death opposed to a god of life, but a recognition that these processes are unified. Creation and destruction are two faces of the same cosmic process. So I put it to you that life doesn't conquer death, nor does death conquer life. Rather, they're playing a grand game together, a cosmic hide-and-seek, where neither can exist without the other. Like the black and white spots in the Chinese Tai Chi symbol, each contains the seed of the other within itself. Each perpetually becomes the other in an eternal dance. And once you truly understand this, doesn't it all become rather amusing? This desperate attempt we make to cling to life and avoid death is like trying to have a world with only north and no south, or with only up and no down. Utterly impossible, and when you see it clearly, utterly absurd. The curious thing about human beings is our persistent belief that we are separate from the world. We feel that we're little men and women inside our heads, looking out at a world that is foreign to us. What a hallucination this is! This illusion of separation is precisely what creates our terror of death. We imagine ourselves to be distinct entities with clear boundaries. Here I am, and there is everything else. But let me ask you this. Where exactly do you end and the rest of the world begins? Is it at your skin? But your skin is constantly exchanging molecules with the air around it. Is it your breath? But the air you breathe out was just moments ago part of your lungs, and before that part of the atmosphere. Is it your thoughts? But your thoughts are shaped by the language and concepts you've absorbed from your culture. The truth is, you are not a separate thing at all, but a process, a verb rather than a noun. You are something the whole universe is doing, in the same way that a wave is something the whole ocean is doing. The ocean waves and the universe peoples. Once you see through this illusion of separation, death takes on an entirely different meaning. It's not the end of you, because the separate you was a fiction to begin with. It's simply a transformation, a change of pattern. The materials that compose you now will compose something else later. The consciousness that you experience now is not separate from the universal consciousness. It's a localization, a focusing, like a whirlpool in a stream. The whirlpool has a distinct pattern and identity for a time, but it's never separate from the stream. And when the whirlpool dissolves, the water doesn't die, it simply flows on in a different pattern. So it is with you. What would it be like to live from this understanding? To recognize that the boundaries we draw between self and other, life and death, are convenient fictions? 0. 5. Wouldn't that be the ultimate freedom? I've always found it fascinating how we humans, supposedly the most intelligent species on this planet, are often blind to the most obvious lessons nature offers us. While we fret and worry about death, nature simply gets on with the business of living and dying in perfect rhythm. Look at a forest for a moment. Not with your concepts about forests, but really look. What do you see? Everywhere, there is growth and decay happening simultaneously. The fallen log becoming soil, the new sapling reaching toward the light, the fungi decomposing dead matter, the birds building nests from twigs. Life and death completely intertwined, neither one possible without the other. Or consider the seasons. In autumn, as the leaves turn brilliant colors before falling, do we mourn this as some terrible tragedy? No, we celebrate it as one of nature's most spectacular displays. We intuitively understand that winter isn't the end of the world, but a necessary phase for spring's renewal. Yet somehow, when it comes to our own autumn years, we lose this wisdom. We fight against nature's rhythm rather than flowing with it. How extraordinary! The seed must crack open and, in a sense, die for the plant to emerge. The caterpillar must dissolve its entire body to become a butterfly. These aren't poetic metaphors, they're the literal functioning of the natural world. Death as transformation is built into the very fabric of existence. Indigenous cultures understood this perfectly. Many Native American tribes saw death not as an ending, but as a change of worlds. The ancient Egyptians viewed death as a journey. These weren't merely comforting stories, they were recognitions of nature's fundamental pattern. And here's something even more astonishing. Your body is already practicing death and rebirth right now. The cells in your stomach lining completely replace themselves every few days. Your skin is entirely new every month. Even your skeleton, which seems so solid and permanent, replaces itself entirely every 7 years or so. You are not the same physical being you were a decade ago. Literally not a single cell remains from that person. Yet here you are with a sense of continuity. Isn't that remarkable? Your body already understands that death and rebirth are not opposites, but a continuous process. It's only your mind that hasn't caught up yet. Now here's a peculiar thing about death that we rarely consider. It always seems to be somewhere in the future, doesn't it? Never quite here. Always approaching, but never arriving. And that's a clue to something rather profound. You see, we tend to think of time as a line stretching from past to future, with ourselves moving along it. But is that really how we experience time? Have you ever experienced anything outside of the present moment? Can you touch the past? Can you reach out and grasp the future? 0. 5. Or is there only ever now? This eternal present is the only reality we ever know. The past exists only as memory in the present. The future exists only as anticipation in the present. All experience happens now. And in this eternal now, death never arrives. By definition, death is not an experience you will have. It's the absence of experience. As the philosopher Epicurus noted, "When I am, death is not. When death is, I am not." This isn't wordplay, it's a fundamental insight. Just as you never experience the moment of falling asleep, but only the moment of waking up, you will never experience being dead. You will experience life in all its phases, right up until you don't. And then there's no you to be disappointed about it. In Zen Buddhism, they have a wonderful practice of dying before you die. This doesn't mean physical death, but rather the recognition that the separate self is an illusion. When you realize this deeply, fear of death dissolves, because you understand that what you really are was never born and cannot die. Time itself is a kind of illusion, not that it doesn't exist, but that it doesn't exist in the way we commonly think. The universe doesn't happen in time. Time is simply how we perceive the universe happening. It's a mode of perception, like color or sound. And if time is more like a construct than an absolute reality, then perhaps death too is not what it appears to be. Perhaps, as T.S. Eliot suggested, the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. There's a marvelous paradox I've observed over the years. Those who learn to die well are precisely those who learn to live well. And by dying well, I don't mean some heroic final moment, but rather a daily practice of release and surrender. You know, the ancient Stoics had a practice called memento mori, remember that you will die. Not as a morbid obsession, but as a clarifying force. When you remember the brevity of life, suddenly the trivial concerns that occupy so much of our attention fall away. What remains is what truly matters. In Zen monasteries, they have a fascinating custom. Each evening before sleep, the monks lie down in the posture of the dying Buddha on their right side, right hand supporting the head, left arm along the body. They then meditate on the fact that this night might be their last. Rather than inducing fear, this practice produces a profound appreciation for the gift of waking up to another day. The art of dying is really the art of letting go. And we can practice this in small ways throughout our lives. When you exhale completely, you're practicing a little death. When you fall asleep, you're practicing a little death. When you finish a meal, end a relationship, move from one home to another, these are all little deaths, little opportunities to practice the art of release. Most of our suffering comes from holding on to what must naturally change. We clutch at experiences, relationships, youth, health, as if by sheer force of will we could prevent the natural flow of transformation. But imagine trying to hold on to a particular wave in the ocean. How exhausting, how futile, and how much we miss by focusing on that one wave instead of enjoying the entire ocean. I'm reminded of a beautiful Zen story. A man walking across a field encounters a tiger. He runs with the tiger close behind. Coming to a cliff, he catches hold of a wild vine and swings himself over the edge. Above him, the tiger sniffs and growls. Below, he sees another tiger waiting to eat him. Two mice, one white and one black, begin to gnaw at the vine. At that moment, he notices a strawberry growing nearby. Holding the vine with one hand, he picks the strawberry with the other and eats it. How sweet it tastes. That's the art of dying and living. To taste the strawberry fully even as the vine is giving way. To be completely present to what is, without denial, without grasping, without resistance. What if death is not an ending but a transformation? Not a period at the end of a sentence, but a comma in an ongoing story? This isn't merely a comforting thought, it's a recognition of how energy works in our universe. Scientists tell us that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. And what are you, essentially, but energy organized in a particular pattern? Your thoughts, your feelings, your physical sensations, all energy. The matter that composes your body is mostly empty space with energy vibrating in various patterns. When a candle flame is blown out, where does it go? It doesn't go anywhere because it wasn't a thing in the first place. It was a process, a particular way that energy was being released through combustion. When the conditions for that process end, the process ends, but the energy continues in different forms as heat and light dissipate into the environment. So it is with us. We are not things but processes, verbs rather than nouns. We're more like whirlpools in a river than separate objects. A whirlpool has a distinct form and behavior, but it's made of the same water as the river. When conditions change and the whirlpool dissipates, the water doesn't die, it simply flows on in a different pattern. In many Eastern traditions, this insight is expressed through the concept of reincarnation, but I think reincarnation is often misunderstood in the West. It's not about you as an unchanging entity jumping from one body to another like a man changing clothes. It's about the continuity of process, the ongoing dance of energy and consciousness taking different forms. Think of how a wave moves across the ocean. The water molecules barely move forward at all, they mainly move up and down. What moves forward is the pattern, the energy. Your life is like that wave, a pattern of energy moving through the field of consciousness and matter. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes death as a liberation, an opportunity for consciousness to recognize its own true nature without the limitations of physical form. Far from being an end, it's seen as an opening, a doorway to greater possibility. Perhaps death is like taking off a tight shoe, uncomfortable at first, strange, disorienting, but then what freedom, what relief, what new possibilities for movement and experience. One of the most peculiar habits of the Western mind is our tendency to divide the world into opposing pairs and then imagine that one side is better than the other. Light is good, darkness is bad. Life is good, death is bad. Pleasure is good, pain is bad. This way of thinking creates enormous suffering because it sets us against half of existence. The Taoist sages of ancient China had a far more subtle understanding. They recognized that opposites don't oppose each other, they depend on each other. They arise together, define each other, and cannot exist without each other. Consider, could you recognize light if you had never experienced darkness? Could you know pleasure if you had never felt pain? Could you value life if there were no death? Of course not. These pairs create each other like the black and white swirls of the Tai Chi symbol, each containing a spot of the other within itself. Life needs death just as urgently as you need your next breath. Without death, life would have nowhere to go, no way to renew itself, no possibility of evolution or change. Imagine if nothing ever died, not a single cell, not a leaf, not an organism. The world would become static, stagnant, overcrowded to the point of complete paralysis. Death creates space for new life. It's the sculptor's chisel that carves away what's not needed to reveal the beauty within. It's the editor's pencil that removes the unnecessary words to clarify the meaning. It's the farmer's pruning shears that cut back the branches to allow for more fruitful growth. And here's something even more fascinating. At the cellular level, programmed death apoptosis, the scientists call it, is essential for life. During embryonic development, your hands formed properly because the cells between your fingers died on schedule. Your brain functions properly because neurons that don't form useful connections are pruned away. Your immune system protects you because cells that might attack your own body are identified and eliminated. Life and death aren't enemies, they're partners in an intimate dance. Each makes the other possible. Each gives the other meaning. Each defines the other's boundaries. This isn't abstract philosophy, it's practical wisdom. When you embrace both life and death as necessary aspects of reality, you stop wasting energy fighting against what cannot be changed. You discover a profound sense of peace in accepting the wholeness of existence with all its apparent contradiction. As the Tao Te Ching tells us, return is the movement of the Tao, yielding is the way of the Tao. Life yields to death, which yields again to life in an eternal returning. And in this yielding is not weakness, but the deepest strength. We modern Westerners are, I'm afraid, rather self-obsessed. We're like someone who watches a vast and glorious play but can only focus on one minor character ourselves. What happens to me? What about my continuation? How important am I? How limiting this perspective is. What if your identity is far vaster than you've been led to believe? What if you're not just the drop of water, but also the ocean? What if you're not just the leaf, but also the tree, and indeed the entire forest? Let me suggest something radical. Consciousness doesn't belong to you. Rather, you belong to consciousness. You are a particular focusing, a localization of a universal awareness that permeates all things. Just as a whirlpool is a localization of the river's flow, your sense of self is a localization of cosmic consciousness. The great Vedantic traditions of India express this with elegant simplicity. Tat Tevam Asi, that thou art. Your deepest identity is not separate from the ultimate reality. The Atman, individual self, and Brahman, universal self, are one. From this perspective, the death of the individual is like a wave returning to the ocean. The particular pattern dissolves, but the water, the essence, remains. Nothing is lost. Nothing is destroyed. There is only transformation. Buddhists express a similar insight through the concept of anatman, or no self. Not that you don't exist, but that what you call you has no separate, independent, permanent existence. You are more like a song than a singer, a dance rather than a dancer, a verb, not a noun. This isn't mere philosophy, it's an invitation to direct experience. In deep meditation, many people encounter moments where the boundaries of self dissolve and they experience a profound connection with all existence. Mystics from every tradition have described this, the dropping away of the separate self to reveal a more fundamental unity. Scientists, too, are beginning to recognize the profoundly interconnected nature of reality. Quantum physics reveals that particles once in contact remain connected, influencing each other instantly across vast distances. Ecologists describe how ecosystems function as integrated wholes, with each species playing a crucial role in the health of the entire system. When you begin to identify with this larger reality, when you recognize yourself not just as a separate being, but as an expression of the entire cosmos, death loses its sting. It becomes simply another transformation in the ongoing dance of existence. Your true identity was never born and cannot die, for it is the ground of being itself. So where does all of this leave us? If death is not our enemy but our partner, if life and death are two aspects of the same process, if our true identity extends beyond the individual form, how then shall we live? I propose that we learn to dance with our mortality rather than flee from it, to acknowledge death not as a distant, fearsome stranger, but as a constant companion that gives poignancy and depth to our days. You see, the awareness of death is a tremendous gift if we allow it to be. It strips away pretense. It clarifies values. It focuses attention on what truly matters. Ask anyone who has had a brush with death, and they'll likely tell you how vividly alive they felt afterward, how the colors seemed brighter, relationships more precious, petty concerns more obviously trivial. Death is the ultimate deadline, and without deadlines, how many of us would accomplish anything? It's the frame around the painting of our lives, giving it definition and boundaries. Without that frame, the painting would lose its focus, its intensity, its very meaning. I often wonder if immortality would be the curse rather than the blessing we imagine it to be. With unlimited time, wouldn't we procrastinate indefinitely? Wouldn't relationships lose their preciousness? Wouldn't experiences become bland through endless repetition? Perhaps our mortality is precisely what makes life sweet. Carlos Castaneda wrote about using death as an advisor. When faced with a decision, he suggested asking, if this were my last day on earth, would this choice reflect my deepest values? What a clarifying question. How quickly it cuts through confusion and reveals what truly matters to us. The dance with mortality isn't morbid, it's liberating. It's about embracing the fullness of the human experience, with all its joy and sorrow, pleasure and pain, beginnings and endings. 5. It's about recognizing that our vulnerability and impermanence aren't flaws in the system, but essential features that give life its texture and meaning. Think of how we appreciate a cherry blossom precisely because its beauty is so fleeting, or how we treasure time with loved ones because we know it won't last forever. This recognition doesn't diminish joy, it deepens it. The great mythologist Joseph Campbell said that we must be willing to let go of the life we've planned so as to have the life that is waiting for us. And this letting go happens not just once at the end of life, but continuously throughout it. We die to childhood to become adolescents. We die to adolescence to become adults. We die to old identities, beliefs, relationships, to make way for new ones. Life is constant transformation, constant death and rebirth. When we resist this truth, we suffer. When we embrace it, we find freedom. So my invitation to you is this: don't wait until you're dying to learn how to live. Let the awareness of your mortality infuse your days with urgency and appreciation. Let it strip away the trivial and reveal what truly matters. Let it remind you that this moment right now is a gift of extraordinary value precisely because it will never come again. As we come to the end of our time together, I want to leave you with this thought. The mystery of death is ultimately the mystery of life itself. They are not two separate mysteries, but one great wonder, viewed from different angles. The Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh beautifully expressed this with his image of the cloud and the rain. When a cloud disappears from the sky, we don't say it has died, we know it has become rain. It continues in a different form. So it is with us. We are not in the universe. We are the universe having taken temporary shape to experience itself. And when these forms dissolve, as all forms must, the essence remains. Nothing is lost. Nothing ends. There is only transformation. To truly live is to make peace with death, not as something that happens at the end of life, but as an integral part of life itself. It is to recognize that endings make beginnings possible, that release makes renewal possible, that death makes life possible. And perhaps, when we fully embrace this truth, we'll discover what the mystics have been telling us all along, that what we are in our deepest essence was never born and cannot die, that beneath all the changes, beyond all the forms, there is a timeless awareness, a ground of being that remains untouched by the dance of mortality. This isn't something to believe, but something to discover for yourself. Not a doctrine, but an invitation to deeper inquiry. Not an answer, but a journey. And on that journey, may you find not just acceptance of death, but a profound appreciation for the extraordinary gift that it offers. The possibility of truly living, fully and freely, in the eternal now. I'm going to let you in on a secret. The most enlightened people throughout history haven't been the most serious. They've been the ones who saw through the charade, who caught a glimpse behind the cosmic curtain and couldn't help but laugh at what they found there. You see, somewhere along your journey you've been sold quite the bill of goods. This peculiar idea that life is an extraordinarily grave affair, filled with important problems, crucial decisions, and weighty consequences. But what if, just what if, this seriousness itself is actually the primary obstacle between you and the most profound understanding of existence? What if the universe is not a drama but a dance? Not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced. Let's explore together the cosmic joke that's been playing out right under your nose all this time. Now, the first thing we must understand is this peculiar phenomenon of seriousness. What exactly is it? When you look at a serious person, what do you see? A furrowed brow, tense shoulders, a certain weightiness to their movements. It's as if they're carrying something tremendously heavy, isn't it? But I want you to consider, what exactly are they carrying? You see, from the moment you were small, you were taught that certain things matter terribly. Your grades in school, your behavior at the dinner table, whether you'll amount to something in life. And as you grew, this list of terribly important matters only expanded. Your career, your reputation, your retirement account, the impression you make on others, the weight keeps accumulating until many people stagger through life absolutely crushed by the imagined significance of it all. But here's what I find absolutely fascinating. If you travel to different cultures, you'll discover that what's considered deadly serious in one place might be utterly trivial in another. The American businessman racing against time would appear quite mad to a Taoist sage sitting by a river. The Hindu mystic's concerns would seem entirely alien to the Wall Street broker. So, doesn't this suggest something rather remarkable? That seriousness isn't inherent in the world at all, but rather it's something we've manufactured. I'm reminded of a Zen story about a monk who asked his master, "What is the most valuable thing in the world?" The master replied, "The head of a dead cat." "Why?" asked the perplexed monk. "Because no one can put a price on it," answered the master. You see, the things we take most seriously are often precisely the things that have no intrinsic value whatsoever. They're simply agreements we've made with each other. Consider money, for instance. We behave as if pieces of paper with particular markings are matters of life and death. But if you were suddenly dropped on a desert island, would those pieces of paper matter at all? Not in the slightest. You'd be far more interested in coconuts and fresh water. The grand illusion of seriousness begins to unravel when we recognize that what we're taking so seriously is, in many ways, arbitrary. It's as if we're all playing an elaborate game but have forgotten that we agreed to play it in the first place. And so we strain and struggle and worry, never realizing that we could at any moment remember that it's just a game and instantly transform our experience. Now, let's dive deeper into this curious matter of seriousness and examine one of its primary sources. That peculiar entity you call me or myself or I. Isn't it fascinating how incredibly important this I seems to be? You see, most of us walk around with a rather extraordinary assumption. The assumption that we are these isolated entities, these separate selves, desperately trying to make our mark on the universe. We have this strange feeling that we're enclosed in a bag of skin, peering out at a world that is not us. And from this perspective, everything becomes dreadfully serious. Because if I am this tiny, fragile thing in an indifferent universe, then I must constantly defend myself, assert myself, prove myself. But what if this whole notion of the separate self is actually the cosmic joke's punchline? You see, in my explorations of Eastern philosophy, I've discovered something rather startling. This feeling of being a separate self, this ego that seems so solid and important, is actually more like a brilliant optical illusion. It's a useful fiction, a convenient way of organizing experience, but not an ultimate reality. Consider this. Could you have any experience of being you without the rest of the universe? Could you experience yourself as something separate without everything that is supposedly not you? Of course not. The experience of being a separate self absolutely requires the whole show. The air you breathe, the ground you stand on, the people you interact with, the entire cosmos stretching back to the beginning of time. So you are not in the world. You are an expression of the world. Just as a wave isn't in the ocean, but is what the ocean is doing at that point. The universe isn't something that you're in, it's something that you're out. Like an apple tree apples, the universe peoples. And that includes you. Now, when you begin to glimpse this, something marvelous happens. This desperate need to prove your importance starts to dissolve, because you realize that you are already as important as the stars and the mountains and the entire cosmic dance itself. Not because you've achieved anything special, but because you are an expression of the whole magnificent show. Think of how much energy we waste trying to be important. All the posturing, the anxiety about what others think, the constant internal monologue assessing how we're doing. It's exhausting, isn't it? And it's all based on a misunderstanding that you need to be important in the first place. The myth of the important self is perhaps the heaviest burden we carry. And yet it's one we can set down the moment we recognize it for what it is, a case of mistaken identity. You are not this isolated ego desperately seeking validation. You are the universe experiencing itself from a particular point of view, and that is both utterly ordinary and absolutely extraordinary. What I find most fascinating about human beings is how we've managed to transform play into painful obligation. You know, if you watch children at play, they are completely absorbed. They're present, they're engaged, they're delighted, and yet they know they're playing. There's a wonderful lightness to it all. But somewhere along the line, something very curious happens. We start to take the game of life with tremendous seriousness. It's as if we were playing a game of Monopoly and suddenly became convinced that our very survival depended on acquiring Boardwalk and Park Place. We'd grip those little pieces of paper money with white knuckles, our hearts pounding with anxiety. We'd lie awake at night plotting our next move. Wouldn't that be absurd? And yet, isn't that precisely what we've done with life? You see, society is, in many ways, an elaborate game. Money, status, achievement, these are the rules we've collectively agreed upon. But the problem arises when we forget that these are conventions, not cosmic laws written into the fabric of reality. Consider how we measure success. We've created these extraordinary yardsticks: how much money you make, what position you hold, how many people know your name. And we've convinced ourselves that these measurements reveal something profound about our worth. But who invented these yardsticks? We did. It's as if we've written the rules of a game, forgotten that we wrote them, and now find ourselves in abject misery trying to win at all costs. I'm reminded of the Hindu concept of Maya, often translated as illusion. But Maya isn't just any illusion. It's specifically the illusion that the game is not a game. It's forgetting that we are playing. And in this forgetting, we transform what could be a magnificent dance into a grueling marathon. Now, I'm not suggesting we shouldn't engage with life's games. Far from it. Play the games with gusto, with passion, with all your heart. But play them knowing they're games. As the Hindus say, God is playing hide and seek with himself. The deepest part of you already knows this is all a divine game. That's why when you become too serious, something in you starts to feel suffocated. You know, when I lecture, people often ask me, "But Alan, if we stop taking things seriously, won't society collapse? Won't we all just lie around doing nothing?" But I'm not advocating for apathy or nihilism. I'm suggesting something far more subtle, that you can be fully engaged with life while maintaining a certain lightness of being. Like a good actor who is completely committed to their role, yet never forgets they're in a play. So ask yourself, what games have you forgotten are games? Where in your life have you transformed play into painful obligation? Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. And what might happen if you remembered the playful nature of existence, even as you continue to participate fully in all of life's dramas? Now, I want to talk about something absolutely essential to understanding this cosmic joke: the liberating power of laughter. Have you ever found yourself in a situation so absurd that you couldn't help but laugh? Perhaps you were terribly angry at someone, working yourself into quite a state, when suddenly you caught a glimpse of how ridiculous you looked, fists clenched, face contorted, and you just burst out laughing at yourself. That moment of laughter is a moment of tremendous insight. It's a sudden shift in perspective where you step outside the drama and see it for what it is. And in that stepping out, there's an extraordinary liberation. You see, the universe is filled with the most delightful absurdities. Consider the human predicament for a moment. Here we are, these peculiar creatures with oversized brains, desperately trying to figure it all out. We've created elaborate systems of thought, massive institutions, complex technologies, and for what? To solve the problem of being alive. But what if being alive isn't a problem in the first place? I'm reminded of a Zen koan. What did your face look like before your parents were born? It's a question designed to short-circuit the logical mind, to create a kind of cognitive hiccup. And in that hiccup, sometimes we catch a glimpse of the cosmic joke. We realize that all our efforts to secure ourselves, to make absolute sense of everything, are a bit like trying to bite our own teeth or look at our own eyes without a mirror. The yogis of India have a wonderful concept called Leela, which means divine play. They suggest that the entire cosmos isn't a grim machine grinding away for some purpose, but rather a kind of spontaneous play, a dance, a game that exists for its own sake. And if that's true, then all our desperate seriousness is a bit like someone at a party refusing to dance because they're too busy analyzing the chemical composition of the floor. Now, there's a particular kind of laughter I'm talking about here. It's not the nervous laughter that masks discomfort, nor the cruel laughter that puts others down. It's a kind of cosmic chuckle that arises when you see through the charade, when you recognize the beautiful absurdity of taking anything, including yourself, too seriously. The Zen masters often used absurdity deliberately to awaken their students. When asked profound questions about the nature of reality, they might respond by pointing to a cypress tree in the garden or shouting a nonsensical word. Not to be deliberately obscure, but to jolt the questioner out of the trap of thinking that reality could be captured in concepts. You know, we have this peculiar idea that enlightenment or awakening must be terribly serious business. We imagine the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree with a grave expression, having profound thoughts. But what if, when he realized the ultimate nature of reality, he didn't nod solemnly but burst out laughing? What if the appropriate response to the mystery of existence isn't reverence but delight, is less than #0? 5# is greater than, so I invite you to cultivate this capacity for seeing the absurd, for catching the cosmic joke. Not as an escape from life, but as a portal into a more authentic way of being. Because when you can laugh at the fundamental absurdity of being a separate self trying to figure it all out, something wonderful happens. You relax. And in that relaxation, paradoxically, you become more fully alive, more present, more capable of genuine engagement with this marvelous dance we call existence. Let's explore more deeply this fascinating concept I mentioned earlier, the Hindu notion of Leela, or divine play. You see, in Western religious thought, we've often imagined that the universe exists for some purpose, some end goal. We ask, what is the meaning of life? As if meaning were something separate from life itself, some external justification. But the Eastern view offers something quite different and, I think, profoundly liberating. It suggests that existence itself is a kind of play, a dance, a game that the divine, or what you might call consciousness, or the Tao, or whatever word you prefer, is playing with itself. Think about it this way. Why do we play games? Not to arrive at the end as quickly as possible. That would defeat the whole purpose. No, we play to play. The meaning of the game is in the playing itself. When children dance, they're not trying to get somewhere. The dancing itself is the destination. And what if the entire cosmos is like this, is less than #0? 5# is greater than, what if, as the Hindus suggest, the absolute reality which they call Brahman is playing an elaborate game of hide and seek with itself. It divides itself into all these seemingly separate forms, into you and me and the stars and the mountains, and then it pretends it doesn't know what it's done. It pretends to be all these individual entities, all for the sheer delight of the game. Now, if you begin to see existence this way, something remarkable happens. You stop asking what's the point of it all, because you realize that's like asking what's the point of dancing, or what's the point of playing music? The point isn't to get to the end. The point is the playing itself. I'm reminded of a conversation I once had with a very serious young man who was studying to be a concert pianist. He was practicing 8 hours a day, driving himself mercilessly, all to prepare for some future moment when he would arrive as a great pianist. But in all his striving, he'd forgotten why he started playing piano in the first place, because he loved it. The music itself was the reward, not some future state of having succeeded. And isn't that how we often approach life? We're so focused on arriving somewhere, on achieving some future state of happiness or success, that we forget to enjoy the journey itself. We transform what could be a beautiful dance into a grueling march towards some imagined promised land. The art of divine play invites us to flip this perspective entirely. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. What if this moment, exactly as it is not a means to an end, but the end itself? What if life isn't a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced? This doesn't mean we can't have goals or work toward things we value, but it transforms how we hold those goals. Instead of tense striving, there's a kind of playful engagement. Like a good game of tennis, you're trying to win, yes, but more than that, you're enjoying the back and forth, the dance of it. So I invite you to experiment with this perspective. What might change if you approached your life as divine play rather than serious business? What if you saw yourself not as a separate entity struggling in a difficult world, but as the universe itself playing at being you for the sheer joy of the game? How might that transform your experience right now, in this very moment? One of the things that makes the cosmic joke so delicious is the way it's absolutely saturated with paradox. And by paradox, I don't simply mean contradiction, but rather those fascinating situations where seemingly opposite truths somehow coexist. You see, the Western mind has been conditioned to think in terms of either divided by or something must be either true or false, good or bad, meaningful or meaningless. We are uncomfortable with ambiguity, with things that don't fit neatly into our conceptual boxes. And this discomfort leads us to take rigid positions, to become terribly serious about defending our particular view of reality is less than #0. 5# is greater than. But what if the nature of reality itself transcends these neat categories? What if, as the Eastern sages suggest, the deepest truth is not either divided by or but both divided by and? What if opposites aren't really opposed at all, but more like the north and south poles of a single magnet? Consider some of the paradoxes that lie at the heart of existence. We are simultaneously incredibly significant and utterly insignificant. From one perspective, you're just a tiny speck in an infinite cosmos here for the briefest moment. From another, you're a unique expression of the universe itself, without whom the entire show would be different. Both perspectives are true simultaneously. Or consider the paradox of control. We spend enormous energy trying to control life, to bend it to our will. And yet, our efforts at control often lead to greater suffering, while our moments of greatest fulfillment often come precisely when we let go. It's as if we must simultaneously engage fully and surrender completely. How wonderfully absurd. The Taoists have a beautiful concept called Wu Wei, which is often translated as non-doing or effortless action. It's the art of acting without forcing, of accomplishing without striving. Like a good surfer who doesn't fight the wave but moves in harmony with it. The surfer is simultaneously in control and surrendered, active and passive. You can't say it's either one or the other, it's both at once. I'm reminded of a Zen story about a master who was asked, "What is the meaning of Zen?" Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. He replied, "When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep." The questioner was perplexed. "But doesn't everyone do that?" "No," said the master. "When most people eat, they're thinking about 1,000 other things. When they sleep, they're dreaming 1,000 dreams. They're never fully present with what they're doing." This is another fascinating paradox. The more we try to make life meaningful by searching for some grand purpose, the more it tends to feel empty. But when we simply engage with what's right in front of us, when we fully taste the apple, or listen attentively to a friend, or lose ourselves in creative work, meaning arises spontaneously, it's not something we add to experience, it's what happens when we stop trying to add anything to experience and simply allow it to be what it is. The cosmic joke, you see, is that we take ourselves so seriously precisely because we haven't understood how profoundly significant everything already is. We're like fish swimming frantically in search of water. So I invite you to dance with paradox rather than trying to resolve it. To hold opposing truths simultaneously with a certain lightness of touch. To recognize that life is simultaneously deeply meaningful and utterly meaningless, that you are both everything and nothing, that the wisest approach may be to care deeply while holding everything lightly. This dance with paradox isn't something you figure out once and for all. It's more like a constant balancing, a kind of existential tightrope walk. But there's a peculiar freedom in it, the freedom that comes when you stop trying to collapse reality into a single definitive interpretation, and instead allow it to be as complex, as contradictory, and as mysterious as it actually is. One of the most delightful aspects of the cosmic joke is how it turns our conventional notions of wisdom and foolishness completely upside down. Throughout history, the truly wise have often appeared as fools to their contemporaries, while those considered wise by society have frequently been the most deluded of all. Consider the court jester, the only person allowed to tell the truth to the king without losing his head. By adopting the guise of a fool, he gained the freedom to be wise. Or think of the Zen masters with their nonsensical koans and unpredictable behavior, deliberately violating social norms to awaken their students. Or the Taoist sages who advocated returning to the state of the uncarved block, a kind of holy simplicity that sophisticated society mistook for ignorance. You see, there's a certain kind of intelligence that can only be accessed through what appears to be foolishness. The overly serious mind, the mind full of knowledge and certainty, actually becomes quite rigid and blind. It can only see what it already knows, can only find what it's looking for. But the fool's mind, the beginner's mind, is open to surprise, to discovery, to seeing things as they actually are, rather than as they're supposed to be. I'm reminded of Jesus' saying that unless you become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. What did he mean by this? I think he was pointing to the natural wisdom of children who haven't yet learned to take the social game with deadly seriousness, who still see with fresh eyes, who still know how to play. You know, if you watch a child at play, there's a kind of natural wisdom there. The child is completely present, totally absorbed in what they're doing. They haven't yet learned to divide life into important and unimportant parts. It's all important because it's all happening now. The leaf they're examining is as fascinating as any philosophical treatise. The mud pie they're making is as significant as any corporate merger. And there's a profound wisdom in this non-discriminating attention. As we grow older, we're taught to be sensible, which all too often means conforming to social expectations and abandoning our natural spontaneity. We learn to filter our perceptions through a grid of concepts, judgments, and evaluations. We stop seeing the world and start seeing our ideas about the world. And in this process, something essential is lost. The fool, in the spiritual sense, is one who has unlearned this conditioning, who has returned to a kind of holy naivete, not by rejecting knowledge, but by holding it lightly, by refusing to let concepts replace direct experience. The fool knows that the map is not the territory, that the menu is not the meal, that the word water will not quench your thirst. In Zen, they speak of beginner's mind, a mind free from preconceptions, open to all possibilities. The master Suzuki Roshi said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, in the expert's mind there are few." This is the wisdom in foolishness, not a rejection of knowledge, but a refusal to be imprisoned by it. So I invite you to cultivate a bit of the holy fool in yourself, to question your most cherished assumptions, to look at the world with fresh eyes, to be willing to appear foolish in the pursuit of a deeper wisdom. because sometimes the quickest way to break free from the trap of excessive seriousness is to be willing to play the fool, to laugh at yourself, to make light of what you've been taking so heavily, to dance when others think you should be marching. Remember, it's not about rejecting responsibility or depth. It's about finding a different kind of responsibility, a different quality of depth, one that includes lightness, playfulness, and the willingness to not know, to be surprised, to see with the fresh eyes of a child while drawing on the rich perspective of an adult. That, to me, is the essence of wisdom, a wisdom that often looks remarkably like foolishness to a world caught in the grip of seriousness. Now let's examine one of the cleverest aspects of the cosmic joke, the way we're perpetually sacrificing the present moment on the altar of some imagined future. Isn't it fascinating how we're always preparing to live but never quite living, always getting ready for some moment that never seems to arrive? You see, we have this peculiar habit of living for tomorrow. We tell ourselves, when I get that promotion, then I'll be happy. When I find the right relationship, then I'll be content. When I retire, then I'll finally start living. And in this perpetual postponement, we miss the only moment we ever actually have, this one, right now. It's as if we're constantly saving up our money for a journey that we never take, or preparing for a feast that we never sit down to enjoy. What an extraordinary way to waste a life. And underlying this habit is a fundamental misunderstanding of time. We think of time as a line stretching from the past through the present into the future. But is that really how we experience it? Have you ever experienced the past directly? Or is the past always a memory, something happening in the present moment? And have you ever experienced the future directly? Or is the future always an anticipation, something happening in the present moment? What if time isn't a line at all, but more like a point that keeps blossoming into now and now and now? What if, as the mystics have been saying for centuries, there is only ever this eternal present moment? I'm reminded of a conversation I once had with a businessman who told me proudly that he'd spent the last 20 years working 60-hour weeks to build his business. And now, he said, I can finally start enjoying life. But I had to ask him, what makes you think you have 20 more years? What makes you think you even have tomorrow? Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. The trap of tomorrow is that it never actually arrives. Tomorrow is always 24 hours away. When tomorrow becomes today, it's no longer tomorrow. So if we're living for tomorrow, we're living for something that doesn't exist except as an idea in our minds right now. This doesn't mean we shouldn't plan for the future. Of course we should. But there's a world of difference between planning for tomorrow and living for tomorrow. Planning happens in the present. It's an activity we engage in now. Living for tomorrow means treating the present merely as a means to an end, as a step on the way to somewhere else. You know, it's quite amusing to watch how seriously people take their plans. They map out 5-year strategies and 10-year goals as if the future was something they could control. But the future is always uncertain, always unfolding in ways we couldn't possibly predict. Life has a way of surprising us, of upending our best-laid plans. And perhaps that's part of the cosmic joke too, that we take our plans so seriously when life itself is so fundamentally unplannable. It's like trying to rehearse a conversation before it happens. You can imagine what you'll say, but the actual conversation will always unfold differently because it involves another person, another consciousness with its own unpredictable responses. The real tragedy of living for tomorrow is that it robs us of the only thing we ever have, the exquisite, unrepeatable moment of now. When we're always preparing to live, we miss the simple wonder of being alive. The taste of tea on the tongue, the sound of wind in the trees, the feeling of connection with another human being. So I invite you to catch yourself when you fall into the trap of tomorrow, to notice when you're treating the present as merely a means to some future end, to ask yourself, what if this moment, exactly as it is not a stepping stone to somewhere else, but the destination itself? What if the purpose of this moment is simply to be this moment? Because when we stop living for tomorrow and start living in the eternal now, something remarkable happens. The weight of time falls away. The burden of becoming someone or getting somewhere dissolves. And what remains is a curious lightness of being, a natural joy that arises not from achieving anything in particular, but from the simple fact of being alive in this extraordinary universe. Now, I'd like to explore some practical ways to release ourselves from the burden of imagined significance to cultivate what we might call the liberation of lightness. Because understanding the cosmic joke intellectually is one thing, but actually living with this awareness is quite another. You see, we're creatures of habit. We've been conditioned to take life terribly seriously, and this conditioning runs deep. It's embedded not just in our thoughts, but in our bodies, in the way we hold ourselves, in the very rhythm of our breath. So how do we begin to unwind this conditioning? How do we learn to hold life more lightly? First, I think, is simply bringing awareness to our patterns of unnecessary seriousness. Start to notice when you're gripping life too tightly. You might feel it as a physical tension, a tightness in your shoulders, a furrowing of your brow, a shallowness in your breath. Or you might notice it in your thinking, a repetitive worry, a rigid judgment, a desperate need to control the uncontrollable. When you catch yourself in the grip of this excessive seriousness, don't judge yourself for it. That would just be adding another layer of seriousness. Instead, see if you can bring a gentle curiosity to it. Ah, there I go again, treating this as if the fate of the universe depended on it. The Zen masters have a wonderful practice called not knowing mind. It's the practice of deliberately letting go of our certainties, our fixed views, our need to have everything figured out. Can you experiment with this? Can you allow yourself to not know, to be surprised, to see things with fresh eyes? Another powerful practice is to deliberately lighten up about things that you normally take very seriously. If you're someone who's terribly concerned about your appearance, try going out one day without spending any time on it. If you're someone who always has to be punctual, try being 10 minutes late and see if the world ends. These little experiments can begin to loosen the grip of our compulsive seriousness. Laughter itself is a tremendous medicine. Not taking myself so terribly seriously doesn't mean I can't care deeply about life. It means that I care deeply without the crushing weight of self-importance. And humor is one of the quickest paths to this state. The ability to laugh at ourselves, to see the absurdity in our most earnest efforts, is a profound spiritual capacity. I'm reminded of the Tibetan concept of crazy wisdom, a kind of spiritual approach that deliberately violates conventional expectations in order to awaken people from their slumber of seriousness. The crazy wisdom teacher might answer a profound philosophical question by throwing a pie in the questioner's face, not out of disrespect, but out of compassion to help them break free from the prison of concepts and experience reality directly. Now, I'm not suggesting you start throwing pies at people, but I am suggesting that there's a kind of wisdom in playfulness, in not always following the expected script. Can you bring more play into your life? More spontaneity? More willingness to color outside the lines? And perhaps most fundamentally, can you begin to question the story of the separate self that needs to prove its importance? Can you start to glimpse that you are not this isolated ego desperately trying to assert itself in a foreign universe, but rather an expression of the universe itself? That you belong here intrinsically without having to earn your place? Because that, I think, is the deepest source of our excessive seriousness, this feeling that we have to justify our existence, that we have to earn our right to be here. But what if you already belong completely without having to do or prove anything? What if your worth is not something you achieve, but something inherent in your very being? The liberation of lightness comes when we begin to see through the illusion of the separate self, when we recognize our fundamental belonging in the universe. From that recognition arises a natural joy, a spontaneous gratitude, and a curious kind of weightlessness. We're still engaged with life, still participating fully in all its dramas and adventures, but we're no longer crushed by the need to make it all work out according to plan. We've caught the cosmic joke, and in that catching, found a freedom that no amount of earnest striving could ever provide. As we come to the final chapter of our exploration, I want to share with you what I consider the ultimate punchline of the cosmic joke, the extraordinary possibility that the universe itself is laughing at itself through you. You see, throughout human history, we've tended to imagine the fundamental nature of reality as either utterly impersonal, a vast machine grinding away without purpose or awareness, or as something like a cosmic parent figure with very definite ideas about how we should behave. But what if both these conceptions miss the mark? What if, as the Upanishads suggest, the underlying reality, Brahman, is not separate from your own deepest awareness? What if consciousness isn't something you have, but something you are? What if your sense of being aware isn't a property of a separate self, but the very same awareness that animates the entire cosmos is less than #0? 5# is greater than, in the Hindu tradition, they speak of Satchitananda being consciousness, bliss. These three, they say, are not separate qualities, but different aspects of the same ultimate reality. To exist is to be aware, is to be joy. And this reality is not something outside you that you have to reach for, but the very core of what you already are. Now, if that's true, then something quite astonishing follows. Your awareness right now, reading these words, is not different from the awareness that's been present in every creature that's ever lived, that's shining through every star and flowing through every atom. It only appears separate because of the peculiar game that consciousness is playing with itself, the game of pretending to be divided into separate selves. And why would consciousness play such a game? For the same reason that you play any game, or watch any movie, or read any novel for the delight of it. For the thrill of surprise, of limitation overcome, of unexpected discovery. For the sheer joy of experiencing itself from countless different perspectives. In this view, the entire cosmos is a kind of divine play, a game of hide and seek that awareness is playing with itself. It divides itself into seemingly separate forms, and then gradually, through the process we call evolution or awakening, it remembers its true nature. And in that remembering, there's an exquisite delight, a cosmic laughter. I'm reminded of a wonderful Zen story. The student asks the master, "What happens when you die?" Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. The master replies, "I don't know." Shocked, the student says, "But you're a Zen master." The master smiles and says, "Yes, but I'm not a dead Zen master." There's a profound truth in that story. No one knows what happens when you die, not because it's some great mystery, but because the you that's asking the question is precisely what disappears. It's like asking, "What happens to my fist when I open my hand?" The question contains a fundamental confusion, because the fist isn't a thing but a temporary configuration. Similarly, what if this sense of being a separate self isn't a thing but a temporary configuration? What if your true nature is the awareness in which this temporary self appears, rather than the self itself? What if death is not the end of awareness, but simply the end of a particular lens through which awareness has been temporarily looking? From this perspective, your deepest nature is not something vulnerable that needs to be protected, not something incomplete that needs to be fulfilled, not something flawed that needs to be perfected. It's already whole, already complete, already perfect. The only problem is that you've momentarily forgotten this, caught up in the game of being a separate self. And that forgetting is not a mistake or a tragedy. It's an essential part of the game. Just as you can't play hide and seek if you know where everyone is hiding, consciousness couldn't play this magnificent game of life if it didn't temporarily forget its true nature. So the cosmic joke is that what we're all desperately searching for, unconditional love, perfect security, complete freedom, pure joy, is not something we need to attain. It's what we already are. We're like fish swimming frantically in search of water, or like someone running through their house looking for their glasses when they're already wearing them. And when you begin to see this, not just intellectually, but in your direct experience, there arises a peculiar kind of laughter. Not the laughter of mockery or even of humor exactly, but the laughter of recognition. The laughter that comes when you suddenly get the joke that's been playing out all along. It's the universe laughing at itself through you. It's awareness delighting in its own disguise. It's the cosmic game recognizing itself as a game. And in that recognition, paradoxically, the game doesn't end. It continues, but now with a lightness, a playfulness, a joy that was missing when you were taking it all so terribly seriously. You're still fully engaged in life, still responding appropriately to whatever arises, still participating in all the dramas and adventures. But you're no longer burdened by the crushing weight of self-importance, no longer imprisoned in the belief that your happiness depends on things working out a certain way. You've caught the cosmic joke, and in that catching found a freedom that no amount of earnest striving could ever provide. You've discovered that the universe is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be experienced, not a serious drama, but a divine play. And in that discovery there's a kind of homecoming, a return to the joy that is your birthright, the bliss that is your true nature. As we come to the end of our time together, I want to leave you with a simple invitation. Take a moment right now to feel the weight of your body, to hear the sounds around you, to notice the rhythm of your breath. And in that noticing, see if you can sense something deeper, the awareness that's present in all these experiences, the consciousness that's reading these words right now. That awareness, that consciousness, is not something small and vulnerable inside your head. It's the very fabric of the universe looking at itself through your eyes. It's the mystery at the heart of existence experiencing itself as you. And when you glimpse this, even for a moment, the cosmic joke reveals itself, and all the heaviness of being a separate self trying to make it in a difficult world dissolves into laughter. Not because life's problems aren't real within their context, but because the context itself is so much vaster, so much more mysterious, so much more playful than we'd imagined. So I invite you to loosen your grip, to take yourself a little less seriously, to allow a little more play into your life. Not as an escape from responsibility, but as an expression of the deepest truth that the universe is not a solemn duty, but a joyful dance, not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And in that living, in that dancing, you might just catch a glimpse of the cosmic laughter that's been playing all along the sound of the universe, delighting in its own magnificent game. The sound of awareness remembering itself through you, the sound of the cosmic joke finally understood,